I'm ready. Let's do it. Okay, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and this is the first ever official Data Center Hawk podcast. I know, just control your excitement here. We're excited to do this, and we produce a lot of content. And I've gotten the question before, why don't you do a podcast? So we've obviously sent a number of our content pieces to audio, but we're doing an official podcast just because we believe in how users are listening to what we do and the opportunity we have to get our message out there. So if you are watching or listening, we thank you. We're excited that you've jumped in. We have a lot of people that interact with our content pieces, and we always love that. It's always awesome from my perspective when we're getting questions from people about the industry, and how the industry's changing, and then we can utilize the data that we have and the information that we have to really answer those questions. So anyway, I'm really excited. For those of you that have never seen any of our content before, I'm David Liggett. I run Data Center Hawk. Data Center Hawk is a platform we built 4 years ago to help data center industry professionals make better decisions. And, it's been fun to watch it grow over the last 4 years. In fact, I think, no lie, I haven't even thought about this. I think yesterday was our 4-year anniversary. Yeah, I should have known that. Imagine that. I know, imagine that. But no, it is. So happy birthday to Data Center Hawk, 4 years. 27th of August. So anyway, that's a little exciting note that, you'll catch on this podcast that you wouldn't catch on other content that we do. But so anyway, we've been doing this now for 4 years, and we love the industry. I think, one of the things I reflect back on, and I'm going to talk about it actually here in a little bit as we launch our first podcast, is, this is a really dynamic market. It's very exciting. And if you think about how young it is, it's obviously the data center industry has been around for a while, but the way that it has changed in the last 10 years and really the commercialization of it, how cloud and colocation have merged together to an extent and are providing new opportunities for users. It's a dynamic market. And so, with so many emerging technologies, literally it controls our lives, and from a business and personal perspective. And so that's, obviously one of the reasons it's so important. And it's one of the reasons that I get so excited about being in the space and being, having a platform in the space, connecting with professionals that are thinking through the way infrastructure needs to change to support the future of how we as businesses and, humans utilize technology. So it's fascinating space to be in, really exciting. The goal of our podcast is really going to be to talk about data center industry trends and things that we've seen at Data Center Hawk. I've seen personally. So you're going to get some of the personal side of David Liggett, maybe good and bad. You can judge. So, but very excited to get to do this, to get to share, our podcast with the listening universe. So wherever you are listening, watching, I want to say thanks. And our team says thank you to your participation and your support. So what we're going to do today, and I think today will be different than most days, but what we're going to do today is actually talk about how the industry has changed. I want to share 8 ways the data center industry has changed since I got involved. And I think that we'll take a look back a little bit at how the market has transpired over the last 10 years. I want to talk about where it is today, and some of this will push towards what we will see in the future as it relates to this industry. I think on this podcast you'll get some thoughts from a technology side, emerging technologies that are changing the industry. I think you'll get we have a lot of data center providers and operators that listen to our content. We have a lot of data center investors, so the investor community is plugged in as they're still working to figure out what this industry really is and how it's changing. So you'll get some market changes, market updates, and market growth information. We track data center markets at Data Center Hawk, so you'll see some of that. And then I think, there'll also be some really interesting content related to how businesses are utilizing technology to meet their needs in a more effective way. So that's really what we're, a lot of the needs that we're seeing right now in the data center industry and some of the things we are looking to solve at Data Center Hawk. Before I start again with the 8 ways the data center industry has changed since I started, I want to talk about some of the inefficiencies in the market. In every data center or every business, every market has inefficiencies, but I think inefficiencies create opportunities. And certainly that is one that we have seen in the data center market. One of the challenges that if you're an investor, you have related to, hey, I want to go place X amount of millions of dollars in this industry, or, I want to go place a $100 million loan with this company is understanding and providing a framework around what the market looks like. And, if you think about, and this is from a commercial real estate side of things, but if you think about the office market, the industrial market, the retail market, those are much more established in their trends, much more established in the way they've grown. The data center industry, as I mentioned, is relatively young. If you think about the fact that the first publicly traded data center REIT, which was Digital Realty, became public in 2004. And, it was then that they were really, buying telecom or, data center assets that were aged and then essentially remaking them and leasing them. And then over time, that market got better. And there were other data center operators working too. But it's a relatively young market. And as I mentioned before, where it is today is dynamic. And even in the midst of that, there's still some inefficiencies. And so I'm going to point out some of those inefficiencies today just through my comments. But I think that, the market has changed dynamically in the last 10 years. So here we go. 8 ways the data center industry has changed since I started. Number one, the data center user is more mature, and I think this has had a massive impact on the data center industry. Number one, I think the data center user, if you think about where companies were 10 years ago and how they viewed their IT infrastructure, one way that they really looked at the way they identified and put their strategies together was control. A lot of the thought process was around how can we control this? There's no way we can let the operation of this infrastructure, the operating of any additional services that we provide to ourselves out of our control. And I think one of the things that we've seen, if you go back to 2008, 2009, 2010, when companies would spend tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars on their IT strategy, is because of the Great Recession at the time, companies didn't have the capital to do that. So they had to look for another way, and sitting there ready and waiting was the data center operator community. And I think at the time they were able to solve a strategic challenge for data center users, which was lack of capital. So you saw a lot of larger requirements that traditionally would have been placed in an owned and operated data center facility get placed in a third party leased facility, and through that the data center user, I think, strategically has changed the way they look at the market. I think the data center user today, from a maturity standpoint, is more financially focused. So I definitely think that data center users have started to really understand how, even at the base level. I mean, if you're talking, power, space, and cooling, that base 1 rack, 10 racks, 1 megawatt, 10 megawatts. There's some cost components there that are now, I think, more clear than they were 10 years ago. And I think it's easier now to compare apples to apples related to some of those costs than it was back then. So I think some of that has helped the data center user become more mature, and that's really led to them making better decisions. Now, if you layer on top of that the additional things like cloud, managed services, and some of the additional technologies that companies are using to put together an IT infrastructure that serves their business most effectively, the financial focus of that has come much more into the picture. And I think it's identified even as you're starting to hear some companies that have chosen to migrate their applications into the cloud and are now recognizing that whatever those applications are in the cloud the way they are have become too expensive. And so they're starting to pull those back and provide more of a hybrid approach. So from that perspective, the financial focus of the data center user has led to the maturity of that entity in the market, and that only makes the market better. I think with the maturity, with data center users and their maturity, they have more of a focus, and with that focus, it causes the rest of the market to focus on how to serve them best. So that's one change we've seen, is that the data center user is more mature, and I think that will continue. On the flip side of that, so number two would be that the data center provider is more mature. So everybody knows at Data Center Hawk, we're essentially neutral as it relates to data center operators. So they're on our platform and utilize it, but we don't have any skin in the game with data center operators. But I will pay them a compliment, and the compliment that I would say is that I believe that if you think about it, over the last 10 years, they have done a good job listening to the data center user and adjusting their product and services to meet their needs. That's kind of a business 101 comment. Listen to the customer, hear what the customer says, look at your service, change your service to meet what the customer needs. You'll get more customers. But I think it's easier said than done. And there was a tone, in 2007, 2008 in the data center industry, there was a tone that I think was coming from the data center operators that was saying, hey, we do this all the time. We have more facilities than any other company. We know how to own and operate this better than anyone. So you might, as a user, have some ideas, but our ideas are better than yours. And that's obviously not the best way to sell to customers. And so I give the data. I don't think that's the tone today. I think that tone has changed. And so I think because of that, you're seeing a result of that tone changing, and the growth that's taken place is a direct result of that. So I think the data center provider maturity has been, hey, we can really work with customers. We can still develop our product, scale it, but we can listen to customers and adjust it as we go to best meet their needs. And I think that was a big change in the industry, and has only benefited the space moving forward. And you can see that as the market has grown. And I've got some statistics here in a second that I'll share about that. I also think that the data center provider today is doing a better job of serving the needs of the end user as it relates to services provided on top of, co-location, your traditional space, power, and cooling. And I think you've seen that as some deals get smaller, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and some deals get bigger. But they've learned how to change their offering to really meet those needs, even at the service level. And I think that's gone a long way, and I think it will continue to moving down the road. So number two is the data center provider is more mature. Number three, so again, this is 8 ways the data center industry has changed since I started. And someday, by the way, when I think about like how long I've been in the space, some days it seems like a very short period of time. Some days it seems like 100 years. So, it's kind of like parenting, I would say. They say that in parenting the days are long, but the years are short. So all you parents out there, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, the third thing that I've seen change is that connectivity and network both play a much more critical role in the decision-making process for a user today than it did in the past. And I think, this is a lot of, there's a lot behind this, but at its simplest form, it has to do with the maturity of the technology that users expect today to utilize a product. So a great example of this is when I was working with the company. So I spent 10 years with CBRE, great company, and just great experience with them. And so we, got to sit with end users that were going to go and determine what their IT strategy was. And there's a Fortune 500 company that was evaluating, several large requirements to be placed in different markets across the U.S. And it supported a mobile application that they wanted to provide for their end users. And in the middle of the process, they changed their focus to be in not just 3 locations, but I think it was like 10. And the transactional sizes got smaller because they wanted to be closer to the end users. And so I think they recognize that, any type of latency with this application of the mobile app would impact the experience of the end user, and they were trying to make sure that the experience that the end user had was excellent. And so I definitely think that, obviously that's one example. There's a zillion others, but we're seeing that really start to change the way that data center users make their decisions. Another thing I would say is that this is one of the reasons that you're hearing a lot about edge, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But, as technologies get more complex and as we decide to do more with technology, AI, the automated car discussion, and these technologies are getting bigger and there's more momentum behind. As an example, I think this morning I read that Toyota had invested $500 million with Uber to get behind their automated car initiatives. So as that momentum grows, it's the connectivity and the network piece that we're seeing play a much more important part of the process because they're wanting to deploy that technology to different parts of the world. And I think that'll obviously be a very interesting path to watch moving forward. Okay, so number 4. Data center requirement sizes have changed. And, I think the thing to ask here is how has this changed the industry? Because obviously that happens in any space over time. But, before, as an example, when I started in the commercial real estate business, the largest, if you're in the data center space, you've heard the terms most likely retail and wholesale colocation. Everybody has somewhat of a unique, different definition of each, but think of wholesale deals as traditionally being bigger. And so when I started in this space, the largest wholesale colocation deals that had been done out there were anywhere from like 8 to 10 megawatts. And again, this was traditionally at smaller densities. So the footprint of this was in let's say 70 to 100,000 feet of computer room square footage, or raised floor square footage. And so these were the biggest deals that were being done in the space. Traditionally large power requirements were being sent to areas in the United States specifically where the market had, a robust infrastructure, a lot of power, a lot of water, and the network could be brought to it. And, power cost was cheap, and there was aggressive tax incentives to win those companies to those places. I'd say 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we really saw a change in the way that some of these larger data center operators viewed the market and their ability to move towards areas that were traditionally strong colocation markets: Northern Virginia, Chicago, Silicon Valley, Phoenix, Dallas, and some others. And I think it was that really has changed a lot of the ways that we're seeing data center requirement sizes today. So it's definitely changed. So one way it's changed the real estate growth, which I think has opened the eyes of the investors to the community. As of 2014, the data center market grew at a relatively reasonable pace. Over the last 4 years, it's grown at a much more aggressive pace. And a lot of that is because of these larger transactions. I think it's changed the service offering. So as the requirement sizes have changed, it's impacted the service offerings being provided by data center operators. It's changed the way that these facilities are being constructed today. I mean, think about it. The data center operator today has to try to attract a small business, an enterprise, Fortune 1000 company, and a large hyperscale company that is going to do, a 20 megawatt type of power requirement transaction. So it's definitely changed that approach. And I think it's created a hybrid market. So as the cloud market has grown, the cloud market has matured, I think that data center, and as the user has matured, it's allowed data center users to kind of play in both spaces, be able to utilize co-location for parts of their requirements, and then also put certain applications in cloud infrastructure that is better suited for their business. And most companies, I think, take that approach. There are some forward-leading companies that would put all of their infrastructure into cloud, but I don't think that's certainly not the majority of companies today. But that has really changed the market, the requirement sizes, and I think that even like some of the absorption that we saw last quarter, specifically in Northern Virginia, I mean, it was more than we've ever seen, and I think that will continue moving forward. So, number 5 is the product has changed, competition has increased, and pricing has decreased. So there's some people that won't be excited about me saying that, but that's the reality of the space today and where we are. So we talked about it before, but how has the product changed is one of the questions that I think it's important to know, especially as you think about pricing decreasing. The reality is that the product today is different than the product was 10 years ago. So, and it's gotten more efficient. It's gotten more secure. At times, it's less redundant. I think it's important to note, there's some people that would go, what are you talking about? How is the data center today less redundant than it was, 10 years ago? Well, as you think about the tier levels of data centers, back in 2000, 2008, 2007, 8, and 9, the tier 4 data center was the standard. And what you saw was a lot of companies build to that tier 4 standard and recognize that was not necessarily the standard needed to achieve their what they really needed at the end of the day from a redundancy standpoint. So the co-location market and the third-party operators, the publicly traded providers, and the privately owned data center operators really work to refine the product to better meet the needs of the end user. So are there still companies that need 2 in at the UPS? Sure. But I think what the data center operator community is seeing today is that a more refined product is more of an N+1 solution with the ability to make it more redundant if needed. And so that's where when I say less redundant at times, that's my statement there. But I think it's been focused on meeting the needs. The product change has been focused on meeting the needs of those different buckets, the smaller users, the Fortune 1000 companies, and the large hyperscale users. The other thing that I mentioned was that competition has increased. So the quantity and quality of data center operators, cloud providers, and additional services that are provided to data center users have just gotten better and better and better. And so, with that competition increase, obviously becomes, offers more options, more solutions, and more competitive pricing. And so that's definitely something that we've seen. If I think about where pricing was 10 years ago to where it is today, it's gotten much more, it's gotten less expensive, and that's benefited the end user. Now, like I said, I think the product has changed, so I think it's a different product today than it was 10 years ago, but that's just been the market maturity. So, the product has changed, competition has increased, and pricing has decreased. Again, so we're talking about 8 ways the data center industry has changed since I started. This is the 6th, and it is the edge is the new cloud. Okay, so scratch your heads on that one for a second. So what I mean by that is I'm certainly not suggesting that these are similar in what they do. But what I'm saying is that when I started in the space, a lot of the discussion was around cloud, forward thinking. How's the industry going to change? Well, let's talk about cloud. Let's talk about what cloud's going to do. And there's a lot of people that say, cloud was already happening. It's just there was a term attached to it, and now it was, it was growing potentially or in a way that it hadn't before. But I'm not suggesting these two are similar. Just from a forward-thinking perspective, when I started, cloud was what people were talking about. If you looked at what people are talking about today from a forward-thinking perspective, I do think cloud's still in the discussion. But I think that really the edge is where a lot of that conversation is happening today. And there's a lot of forward-thinking speculation, conversation, predictions about how emerging technologies and how we serve those emerging technologies will impact the data center industry. So there's a Rich Miller who runs Data Center Frontier, who I'm sure a lot of you listening know. But he produced a great article a few days ago on how to clear up the confusion with edge. There's a lot of differing variations of the definition, as it relates to edge. But there were some really good thoughts in this article, and you can get it's datacenterfrontier.com. But you can get on there and read. He's interviewed a number of people that are heavily invested in the edge space. In fact, one is DartPoints is an example of a company. It's been in 5 or 6 years ago began. In fact, we have an interview that we did with Hugh Carspec, and the DartPoint CEO. And one of the things he said that I thought was really funny. I asked him, "Hey, what's changed since you got in the space?" And he made the comment, "Well, I'm not getting my shins kicked in as much today as when we started." And I think he was just saying, essentially that, people are starting to recognize that this is really going to happen. And there's obviously other comments in the article, but I think one thing most can agree on as it relates to edge is that there's going to be a significant amount of work needed and infrastructure built to support these future technologies. 5G is a really good one, and it's probably one of the easiest ones to think about. But how the market serves that technology moving forward, there's some really exciting things happening. Some big challenges ahead with it as well. But I think this is an emerging space for our business that will have a large impact down the road, and it will definitely impact the data center industry. Number 7, flexibility becomes a much more important deal driver for end users. So one of the things that one of the most impactful changes to the industry is the importance that data center users have placed on flexibility. And as I mentioned before, if you think about the data center user of 10 years ago, a lot of that user was focused on control. How can I control my environment? I will spend more and have less flexibility to have that control that I need. And I think that has changed. So I'm a big football fan. I love football. In fact, the best time of year is about to start with football beginning. And I oftentimes like to liken the IT infrastructure group at a company to the field goal kicker. and I think this is actually a very good analogy. And here's why. Number one, the field goal kicker, when he runs out on the field, he's supposed to make the field goal. There's not a lot of room for him to miss. And if he makes the field goal, everybody's kind of like, "Hey, good job." And you're done thinking about him. If he misses the field goal, everybody hates him. And that is when I think about the IT infrastructure group, they are expected to just to have everything running smoothly. And if everything's running smoothly, it's kind of like, "Hey, good job, way to go." But if things don't go well, then they become, whose fault is it? And they're the group that has to answer for that. And so this, not to get too deep here, but there's, I think, a lot of fear in the data center industry of, hey, if the technology doesn't work, if we have to move this technology, if we, can't migrate the technology effectively, so things just stay the way they are and they don't innovate and they don't change because people are afraid for it to mess up. And so, anyway, I do think that is the case with, data center IT infrastructure groups. It's hard. It's hard work. I don't think they get the probably the respect and the appreciation that they deserve. Especially as more companies think about how companies depend on their IT infrastructure today. I mean, it is so important. But a lot of it, the challenge is they face an environment that's always changing. So take that same field goal kicker mentality. Imagine you are the field goal kicker. You have practiced. You have prepared yourself. Your team is on the sideline. It's 3rd down and 11, incomplete pass. It's time to kick a field goal. You run out on the field. Your guys line up. The snap gets snapped back to the holder. The holder is there. You look up to see where the field goal is, and it's not there because it's changed. They've moved it to the other side of the field, or they've moved it to another spot. And so this is what a lot of IT organizations face, is they put their strategy together. They get it all set. They've got to get buy-in from people all throughout their organization, different parts, the CIO, the CFO, sometimes obviously the CTO, sometimes the CEO. Everyone has said yes. And so by the time they're ready to execute, technology has changed. They've bought 2 companies. There's a new technology that has come to the market, and they can now get more efficient if they use it. And so the target is moving, and that's very hard to make long-term decisions when you never know what the future is going to be. And so that is why we've seen flexibility become so important for the data center user. Their ability to have flexibility and the opportunity to change as things move forward has become highly important. So you've seen how has that impacted the space. You've seen deal sizes get shorter. You've seen hybrid approaches taken so that companies are able to grow into technologies that make the most sense for them. And you've also seen, companies really value the ability to, have flexibility with capacity and where that capacity is placed. So anyway, flexibility is here. It's a need for the end user. It will be for a long time because the future is not getting any clearer anytime soon for a company that has to put an IT infrastructure plan together. And then the last, point I want to make as far as again, this is 8 ways the data center industry has changed since I started. Number 8, we've had massive growth in several markets, moderate growth in others. And so this is from, if you look at the geographic areas where the data center market has grown over the last several of years, it's really been focused in 3 to 4 different key areas in the United States. And there's been other markets that have grown. We've seen some secondary markets grow, but not at this massive pace that some of these other markets have. So at Data Center Hawk, we track basically the top 10 data center markets and all the power that is commissioned in those markets and being willing to be leased from a data center perspective. And over the last 3 years alone, 1 gigawatt of power has been added to the top 10 data center markets that we track at Data Center Hawk. And I think what's important there is to note that a significant amount of that power that's been added has really taken place in, the majority of that's Northern Virginia, but Chicago, Silicon Valley, Dallas, Phoenix, all those markets have received a significant amount of that power. And then you have additional markets like Atlanta, New York, Northern New Jersey, Seattle that are growing, but they're just growing at a more moderate level. And that is, the reason that the larger growth occurs there is because, there's, for the end user, there's strategic reasons to be in those markets. You have the infrastructure there to support that growth. You have competitive options. So a lot of the investments that were made in Northern Virginia years and years and years ago are paying benefits today. A lot of the investments, obviously Silicon Valley, and the technology hub that's there with the companies that are headquartered there is one of the many reasons that market grows the way it does. Chicago is very strategic. There's a number of businesses there that want to be close to their IT infrastructure, but we're now seeing obviously growth kind of come out of the city there into the suburb areas and the Elk Grove villages and Aurora and markets on the west side of the city. And then we're also, Dallas is another good example. It's really positioned to grow effectively moving forward. Phoenix has seen cloud growth, larger companies that find that market attractive, and there's a number of reasons why. But that is why those markets are receiving that growth, and I think you'll see that trend continue moving forward. It's not that I don't see those and we don't see those other markets growing, but we just don't see them growing at the rate that some of these bigger markets are. So again, those are the eight ways the data center industry has changed since I got started. A number of them have, they're just really in my opinion, things that have significantly changed the space. And I think, as I mentioned before, the space is still very young. The market is still very young. And the way that, because it changes the way it does, I think that the next several years will be very interesting, especially as the edge market matures, especially as you look at the way that data center users are using technology to support their businesses, and the way that we as humans utilize technology just on a daily basis. But it's, make no mistake about it, it is such an exciting space. And that's one of the huge reasons that we're plugged into it, that we're excited about the market moving forward, and excited about doing podcasts like this. I think moving forward with our podcast, as I mentioned before, we'll talk, about some of the emerging technologies that are coming to the market. We'll hit some market overviews. So, we're coming up on, some of the changes at the end of the quarter as it relates to market growth, market vacancy, market absorption. And we're able to highlight the trends that have taken place in those markets over the last quarter. I think we want to highlight some of the challenges that we see in the market related to data center industry professionals that are trying to make the best decisions they can. And then I'd also like to highlight, some of the personal side of what we do here at Data Center Hawk, and just, some of the things that we're really excited about just within our company. And so one thing that I would just say today, and maybe I'll just do this at the end of these, but one thing I'd just say today is I think that in our industry, as it relates to the data center side of things, we've got people from all different parts, at least the people that listen to our content. We have, data center users themselves, so companies, individuals that are plugged into the IT organization at the company themselves. We have data center consultants, so people that are actually helping companies, make better decisions. We have, data center operators, so companies that are actually providing the data center infrastructure to the end user themselves. We have those that serve the space, from a vendor perspective, and helping sell different components to people that need different things in the space. And we have data center investors, companies that are trying to determine how much money and where to invest in this industry. And I would just say, every time I think about what we're doing, I become, I think, more proud of our space, the maturity around our space, what we're doing. We got a lot of things to figure out. The industry has a lot of things to figure out. I think there's a shortage of younger or tenured professionals in the space. There's a shortage of women in the space. There's a number of things that the industry has to figure out. But I think we can all be proud that we are part of something that is literally supporting the IT infrastructure world as we know it, supporting the lives of those that that walk around every day from a business perspective, and even from a personal standpoint. So I will leave you with that. That's really what we wanted to accomplish today, and very excited about moving forward. So stay tuned, stay alert, additional podcasts to come. But other than that, we're finished. Thanks for listening.